Welcome to Faculty Spotlight, and today I'm delighted to have as our guest today Professor Greg Laurence. Professor Laurence is Professor of Management and Chair of the Department of Management and Marketing in the School of Management. He is also Director of Graduate Studies at the Center for Japanese Studies in Ann Arbor, and Director and core faculty member of the International and Global Studies program here at UM-Flint. Welcome, Professor.
Hello, everybody.
How are you doing today?
I am doing well. It's election day, so it's a bit, I suppose, nerve-wracking for everybody.
Well, you have a variety of life experiences and academic experiences that I think most people don't know about. And perhaps you could tell us a little bit about yourself. I'm pleased to represent that you are a Midwest boy.
Yes, that's true. I'm originally from the west side of Cleveland, and so I grew up in the state down south, as people up here like to refer to it. I went to Ohio University for my undergraduate studies, which importantly for my life in Michigan is not Ohio State.
That's fair to say.
And I studied history, actually, and I think that probably that background is a bit different from most of my School of Management colleagues, I would say.
Well, you developed an interest in Japanese studies. How did that come about?
Well, it's a long story. The original spark, I suppose, was seeing the miniseries version of James Clavell's novel Shogun in about 1982. I'm going to guess. It's in that sort of early 80s period. And so that initially got me interested in things Japanese. And then probably the bigger thing was a family vacation we took to Wilmington, North Carolina when I was in junior high. And we went on a tour of the USS North Carolina Battleship Museum. And that was sort of the moment, I guess, that I decided World War II in the Pacific was going to be the thing that I wanted to study. So that sort of sent me down that rabbit hole. A few people know that I was a foreign exchange student in high school. I went to Turkey, but interestingly, my first choice of country to go to was Japan, and the American Field Service AFS, who ran that study abroad program, sent me to Turkey instead.
Makes perfect sense.
Absolutely. And so, I mean, that is one of the main reasons that I continue to be interested in study abroad, was that was a positive experience. But I went on to college and studied Japanese history. I sort of moved away from the war and studied interwar Japanese history from the 1920s and 30s.
Interesting. And then you went to spend some years in Japan, correct?
Yeah, so I was initially thinking I might go to graduate school to study Japanese history, but I couldn't speak any Japanese. And
yeah, that's a bit of a problem.
My advisors said, you should probably do something about that. And, I was 21 or 22. I couldn't really afford to just take time off to study Japanese. So I one day working a part-time job, I was reading the new classified ads in the newspaper, and there was an ad for a company in Seattle selling a book that was, I think the title was like How to Get a Job in Asia, something benign like that. And they the book was $25 or something, but they offered a money-back guarantee. If you didn't have a job offer in Asia within 90 days, they would refund your money.
Interesting.
And so I bought the book and I applied to some jobs in Japan, and probably what I remember is that I applied for jobs in the fall of '94. I had an interview with a company called Eon that runs English conversation schools in October sometime, late October, I believe. That interview was like on a Wednesday, Thursday. I had a job offer from them on Monday. And I was in Japan January 7th of 1995. So there was about a 7 or 8 week turnover from the moment that I accepted the job until setting foot there.
So you were there until you went for your PhD program at Syracuse University.
Actually, no. I was there initially from 95 to 2001. Okay. And I taught English at Eon for 4 years, and then moved to a different part of Japan to teach at a high school for a couple of years. Mm-hmm. And teaching at that high school was, I mean, there were some really positive things about that experience, but it did suggest to me that I didn't want to teach English as a second language for the rest of my life, and B, that I needed something more from an academic point of view if I wanted to progress in any sort of career. And so I actually came back in 2001 to do my MBA. Right. And I did that at Syracuse, and that was a pretty amazing experience for a number of reasons. One, starting your MBA in August of 2001 means you're part of an MBA cohort that does not define, it was a full-time MBA, which is 2 years, but we were part of an MBA cohort that do not define our time as first year, second year. We define it as pre 9/11, post 9/11. Yeah. Right? That you're 2 weeks into your program and that happens, and that sort of colored the whole experience. But it was there that 3 different professors, presumably independently of each other, but I don't know for sure, asked at varying times through my career, hey, have you ever thought about getting a PhD in management? And my answer was, of course, no. But tell me more about that. Yeah. But still, so I finished up, I had a dual degree program. I did an MBA and a Master of Arts in International Relations, where I studied conflict resolution and negotiation and East Asian international relations. And I finished the on-campus portion of that in 2003, did a semester study abroad at Waseda University in Tokyo, and then got a job for a consulting company in Tokyo. We did development consulting, working on World Bank and other international financial institution projects around the world. I was the international business development guy, so essentially working in Tokyo, writing our project proposals and budgets, and sending those off to the companies. The part of that was, I suppose, frustrating for someone who has wanderlust like I do, was that the consultants were the ones who got to go to the countries and do the really interesting work after I had written the proposal that got them the job, right? So I worked there for a little over a year, about a year and a half, and then heard through the sort of Tokyo expat grapevine that the membership manager job at the American Chamber of Commerce was coming open. And so I applied for that and got that job and slid into that role, which, to be quite honest, was probably the best job I had before this one. That was a really cool job. I got, as you can imagine, it's the American Chamber of Commerce is the biggest networking organization for essentially, well, all non-Japanese, but a lot of Japanese business people as well in Tokyo. So I mean, it's 5,000 members. All of the people who matter in terms of international business, whether entrepreneurs or the big foreign firms, what they say in Japanese, the gaishike, like JP Morgan, everybody who's anybody is in the American Chamber of Commerce. And so
Right.
being the membership manager means that you know all of them, which is was kind
A
of
lot
cool.
of large multinationals.
Well, yeah, large multinationals and the little, the little entrepreneurial ventures that foreigners were running all over the place in Tokyo and Osaka, and some really exciting companies there as well. So I mean, it was the full spectrum. And I ended up, though, it was a situation where my desk was right on the other side of the partition from the person who was the director of external affairs, which is the part of the American Chamber of Commerce that does all of the advocacy, where the members are advocating for certain policies with the Japanese government that are trying to make it a more friendly environment for non-Japanese business. And listening to her on the phone all the time, was like, man, she's got the really cool job.
You wanted to bring your negotiation skills into it,
and so at that point, that is sort of the time, I think about 3 to 6 months into that job, that was when the memory of those faculty at Syracuse saying, hey, have you ever thought about getting a PhD in management, really came back. And I talked to my then girlfriend, now wife, about this. And, she said, you're pretty hard to deal with when you're bored at work. And so if you're going to get bored with every job you ever do 6 months in, right, like, that's not something I want to deal with. So if getting a PhD and doing that work will stop you from, if that keeps you from being bored, then you should do that. And so
had she visited Syracuse before?
No, she had not. She had not. Well, that's not true. I guess she had been in sort of northern snowy parts, so she sort of had a sense. But
yeah, that's not the same.
But it turned out, right. I mean, I applied to a bunch of schools, but it turned out that's actually, so one of the fun stories in all of this is, so I got one offer to go to one acceptance to a PhD program. I had a couple of wait lists that were at, one was at INSEAD in France and one was at the University of Minnesota, but everyone I talked to said, you don't want to be like their 10th choice. You'd rather be the first choice at a school. So Syracuse it was, and I think that actually turned out well, because we went back to some place that I was already comfortable in. And I knew many of the faculty. I knew where to go shopping, right? Like some of those things. So, yeah. So we were there 4 years,
and you joined the faculty here in 2010, correct?
Correct. Yes.
Well, you mentioned several areas that were the subject of your MBA, some of your MBA coursework, but you now teach courses on those subject areas here a number of years later. So what courses are you teaching these days?
Mm-hmm. So I'd say these days I teach probably 90% of my teaching load is negotiation classes for the MBA program and the Master of Science in Leadership and Organizational Dynamics. I have the introduction to negotiation class that the required course that everybody takes, and then an advanced negotiation class that org leadership concentration students and MS students take. I have taught in the past the undergraduate negotiation course, which is part of management and marketing majors, and maybe a couple of others have the option of taking that. And then now and then, like this semester is a good example, I'm teaching the organizational behavior class for the MBA students as well. And I've taught that plus human resource management for undergrads.
What are your, what are you working on research-wise these days?
So these days, I do a lot of work on workspace design and personalization. And so the big thing that I'm working on right now is related to that. And this is a pretty exciting time to be involved in that research because you had this moment in March, when everybody went from working at work to working at home.
Right.
And in the past, right, there's been a lot of research on working at home, remote working and flex time and things like that. But all of that research is based on people who opted in to that, right? Because there was always an option to work someplace. Either you chose to work, you asked your company, you said, can I work remotely? And they said, go forth. Or you chose a company based on having that ability to work remotely. And there's a big difference between the findings where people are concerned when they have chosen to do it versus the findings when everybody has to do it. So that's been a really interesting thing to watch. And then, of course, what's going to happen eventually, right, is that organizations will go back to the workplace. But we're already seeing, pretty clear indications that not everybody who works for every organization is going back to work 100% of the time in a standard workplace. That there's going to be much, much more sort of hybrid kinds of work from home some of the time, go to work some of the time kinds of situations for people. The companies they've realized, right? You save too much money when you downsize and don't have the overhead. And your employee, the loss of productivity is not nearly as great as maybe people were afraid that it was going to be. And people are adaptable and they figure out how to do it. So there's going to be a lot of demand for understanding about how best to design the spaces in which people work, either at work as people redesign those, or at home as people make their home workspaces more permanent. And so some of the work that we're working on right now is developing a formal theoretical framework to explain the impacts of a finite set of characteristics of the workspace that matter. For those who took anyone who's taken an organizational behavior class should remember the job characteristics model, which says, right, that there are 5 core characteristics that all jobs have. And our essential premise is that to the extent you can define 5 characteristics of a job, you should be able to define X number of characteristics of the physical space in which we work. And all physical workspaces will have those characteristics to varying degrees. And those characteristics should impact people's experience.
Well, and the psychological impact, you're not going to have the commuting expenses. Are we now going to have employers paying for houses or part of the utility bills associated with this? And how people perform in their productivity and how to measure that. I knew you were interested in something fun related to this space.
Well, and I mean, even if there's a loss of productivity from working at home, that loss of productivity may be balanced out or outweighed by the savings of not having a big office to pay rent on, right? And if that's the case, then the company says, sure, we'll take an 8% loss in productivity if we save 20% on costs, right? The company still comes out ahead.
We look forward to reading your paper, Professor.
Well, we're hopeful that it will be out and under review at the Academy of Management Review by the end of this fall semester. That's the plan.
Interesting. So you, moving slightly, or shifting our focus, what do you like about the University of Michigan-Flint? What do you like about the students? What do you recommend they do with their lives if they don't know what they're going to do with their lives?
Right. Well, I mean, I have always enjoyed the aspect of working in the sort of urban university environment where the students that you're teaching are coming from the community and going immediately back out into the community, right? Like there's a big difference between that kind of a student body and the traditional 18 to 22-year-old student body that lives on campus, right? And when you're teaching in an applied science, applied social science, like we are, you know, the fact of the matter is that students come to a negotiation class or an organizational behavior class and they learn something about, you know, how to do an integrative negotiation, make the pie bigger, right? And they may learn that on Tuesday, and then they go to work on Wednesday and they have an opportunity to do it. And they didn't, a lot of times they'll come back the next week and say, you know, I didn't realize how much I was using all of these things in my daily life, but didn't have the sort of framework to understand them and to utilize to improve my outcomes. And so I think that aspect of teaching here is really great, that you have this, you're making that immediate impact and in a measurable way. And it's good. This is going to sound a little strange. And I don't want it to sound a little strange, but it will. In some ways, teaching in Flint reminds me of teaching beginning English speakers. And I really liked that because the learning curve was so steep, right? That the advances that people made in their learning were immediate and apparent. Mm. And when you're teaching in an environment, when you're teaching business in an environment where there have been so many struggles post 1988 when GM left, right? The impacts that our School of Management has in the business community are immediate and apparent. And I like being able to see those really big leaps and bounds that the community takes due to the kinds of things that we're doing at UM-Flint. And I mean, you've been around UM-Flint for about, I guess, a couple of years longer than I have. But if you think about what downtown Flint looks like today compared to 2010, it's a sea change, right? Like it's a totally different place.
Yeah.
And to sort of be at ground zero for those steps that are happening to move the city along, I think is really cool.
Well, that's fun. That's fun to see the progress we've made.
And I will say, you want to know what students should do. So if I sort of switch hats and put on my Director of Global Studies hat, and I lead study abroads for UM-Flint. I mean, if there's one thing that our students should do, it is give very, very, very serious thought to doing a study abroad program while an undergrad or while a graduate student. You know, I know that there's a high percentage of our students who have been on the programs that I've been on who get their first passport in order to go. There are students who get on an airplane the first time in their lives to go. I would suggest to you that not a single one of them regrets that decision. And to the extent that those programs are available and relatively reasonably priced and we do little short-term programs that are 12 or 14 days long. The time investment is not huge, but the impact that it can have on a student's life, I think, is immeasurable. So I would suggest to, you know, all students, do a study abroad. And if you don't, then think about going someplace to live for a while after you graduate.
And the reason for that is cultural awareness.
Cultural awareness and understanding of how different places can be I think, beyond that, right, having that line on your resume, I mean, if you're thinking about the benefit to a student in the very long term, you're showing a company that you're adaptable, that you're open to new experience, that you're willing to take risks and try something new and different. And companies want evidence of that kind of behavior in the employees that they're going to hire, right? So there's that from a really practical standpoint. But then I think, again, that exposure to something that's outside of your comfort zone is hugely beneficial. And maybe it shows you, right, how important your local community is and how much you really love it where you're from, right? Like that can happen. Maybe it also shows you, hey, I really liked who I was while I was in country X. Let me try to find a way to explore that more after I graduate. Like there just is no drawback to doing it from my perspective.
Well, that's excellent advice. Thank you for sharing all of this with our students today, and we appreciate you taking the time to do this.
All right, no problem at all. And at this point, all you can say to people is stay safe and stay healthy.
All right. Thank you, Professor.
And study hard.
And keep studying. Right. Thank you, sir.
Yep, thanks.